Our family in Mom's house is finally finished. Hurry up and unlock it, my husband cheerfully says, as if he just built the house himself. I understand the excitement of seeing our brand new home after almost a year of waiting. But my husband was blurting out something I couldn't comprehend at all. What are you talking about? We agreed that we would live with my parents, didn't we? This house was bought in my name as a two-family home, intended for my parents. Indeed, my parents are sitting in the back seat of the car I drove here, and there are some belongings we packed from our family home. It's definitely not for the mother-in-law who barged into our lives and has been tormenting me ever since. However, my husband meets his mother's eyes and laughs as if to say, "What a predicament. The real trouble is mine." I try to remain calm to not worry my ailing parents waiting in the car, but my heart is pounding fiercely. We've been living together, and now suddenly you want to live with your own parents? I've never heard of such a wife. It's unfortunate for your parents who came here, but could you have them move into a facility or something? The moment I heard the word facility, my blood ran cold. I had been thinking about what to say and how to make this situation right, but I realized there was no need for that. I understand your true nature very well now. So, let's agree to a divorce right here, right now. I am Catherine. I've been a clerical worker at the same job since graduating, and I turned 28 this year. Dreaming of city life, I impulsively decided to go to university in Los Angeles 10 years ago. Strongly wanting to leave my hometown, I somewhat forcibly left, leaving behind my physically weak mother and elderly father. My mother said, "You're young, you want to see the world, right?" But I think she always wanted her only daughter close by. When I graduated from university and had been working for 2 years, my father's knees worsened, and he retired. Now, they are getting by on my father's savings, my mother's part-time earnings, and their pensions. Having worked in construction for a long time, it seemed my father was quite depressed when he had to leave the industry. When my mother called me about this, I even suggested quitting my job temporarily to return home. But later, my father directly told me, "I'm not old enough to be worried about by my kids. Instead of that, you should think about getting married to ease your parents' minds." I immediately understood that my stubborn, blunt father was saying this out of love. After meeting Bob and dating him for 3 years, when we decided to get married, my father insisted, "I have to stay healthy to see my grandchild," and he became more dedicated to his physical therapy, as my mother happily shared. My mother was also delighted about the marriage, and I thought I might have finally done something filial. I met Bob at a company party. Even though we worked at the same company, clerical staff and salespeople rarely meet, but we ended up sitting close at the social gathering because neither of us drank alcohol and felt left out. That day, Bob and I took care of drunk colleagues together and made sure everyone got into their taxis before we left. Perhaps because his job involves a lot of entertainment, Bob was adept at refusing drinks and listening, which felt like a savior to me, who could do nothing. I had little experience in love and soon became interested in him, though Bob, a popular guy regardless of department due to his good looks, told me he could be himself when talking with me and asked me out. At that moment, I felt like I was on top of the world, thinking there could be no greater happiness. I realized something was off about my husband 3 months after our marriage, when we visited his mother's house where she lived. The way my husband and his mother interacted then, as two adults unusually close, constantly touching each other. Him on her shoulder and head, her on his back and arms, might make sense as a deepening of their bond, especially since his father had passed away when he was young. If it were only that, it would have been fine, but in this meeting, including me, my husband started saying unbelievable things. By the way, that restaurant Mom recommended, Catherine really liked it, too. She didn't forget to order the cheesecake that Mom loves, and that was also great, right, Catherine? Oh, that restaurant. The night view is gorgeous, isn't it? Didn't you go to all the places I recommended for your dates? I chose them from a woman's perspective, so you could enjoy them without worry. Turns out, every spot from our dating days to the restaurant where I received the proposal had been pre-selected by my mother-in-law. She even gleefully told me that my husband had consulted her on the proposal itself, which made my skin crawl. Mother is never wrong. Seeing my husband say this so innocently, I realized he was extremely attached to his mother. Why hadn't I noticed this during our dating period? If I had known this from the start, I would have been more cautious about getting married. But this must have been my mother-in-law's strategy. When my husband went to the bathroom, leaving me alone with her, she said, "I think I understand what you're going through. He has always been under my thumb. If a bride knew this before the wedding, she might call it off, right? I used to be mean to his past girlfriends because I loved him too much, but I've started wanting to see my grandchildren now. I don't really care about you, the daughter-in-law, but please have a well-behaved child." I had already talked to her about my parents. What would my parents, who were so happy about the marriage, think if I told them we divorced after just 3 months? It was my fault for not checking the surrounding information thoroughly because I was too caught up in the marriage with Bob. Since there were hardly any conflicts with my husband, I thought our married life could go smoothly as long as we didn't visit his parents' house, so I tried my best to avoid any interaction with my mother-in-law. However, she seemed to see right through me and repeatedly came to the place where my husband and I lived. If I tried to refuse her entry for any plausible reason, my husband would hurriedly intervene, sit her down in the living room, and they would chat for hours. When he wasn't around, she would scrutinize every room, nitpicking about uncleaned spots or criticizing me for buying food that was near its expiration date, causing me mental stress. When I complained to my husband, he dismissed it as mother's teaching. Far from taking it seriously, he had secretly moved forward with plans to live with her, and by the time we had been married for a year, I was facing her every day. From morning till night, she ordered me around without letting me rest for even a moment. The only time I could escape her gaze was when I entered the bedroom, but according to her instructions, I was forced to sleep next to my husband, leaving me no time to be alone without thought. During shopping trips, I often thought about abandoning everything and returning to my hometown. But the heartfelt letters sent regularly by my parents tightened my chest, making it hard to muster the courage. I told myself that divorce over a mother-in-law issue was not justifiable and pretended to be a good wife on the surface. However, the more I endured, the more my mother-in-law treated me like an intruder, finding fault even with my coughs, and my husband was completely under her thumb, showing no signs of protecting me. When I returned from work, there was not even a simple welcome back. Immediately after, I would be rushed into cooking or laundry without him showing any sign of appreciation. Yet, if his mother spent just 5 minutes weeding the garden, he would quickly take over and complain to me, "Don't make my mother do such things." I was aware of my mother-in-law deliberately going out to the garden and digging in the dirt, and it was unpleasant to see her smirking at me as my husband scolded me. Gradually, as the idea of divorce filled my mind, an opportunity came my way. One day, a letter arrived from my mother. Usually, she sent vegetables from our home garden along with the letter, but this time it was just an envelope. Feeling a strange premonition as I read the letter, I learned that my mother had been diagnosed with an illness during a health examination and had been hospitalized. Though she was expected to be discharged, the doctor had told her that working would be difficult from now on. Realizing this was a serious matter, I immediately returned home. When I told my husband, he seemed genuinely concerned and offered to inform his mother, allowing me to leave home without worry. When I arrived at my parents' house, my father greeted me with a surprised yet happy look. I then went to the hospital where my mother was staying and asked to visit her. Although my mother looked surprisingly well, the IV connected to her arm fueled my anxiety. If my mother can no longer work, my parents' income will only consist of their pensions. My mother has life insurance, so she can get some temporary coverage, but that money and their savings won't last forever. Worried about money and unable to overlook my parents' situation, I proposed living together on the spot. When I declared that I would also divorce, naturally, my parents were shocked. When I explained to them about the treatment I had been receiving from my mother-in-law and how my husband had been under her thumb, they understood why divorce might be necessary. I suggested that if we were going to live together, We might as well tear down the current family home and build a new two-family house. Fortunately, since I had been commuting between home and work and had no time to go out with friends since getting married, I had some savings. I talked about using that as a down payment to secure a loan, and my mother's eyes sparkled with excitement. She said, "Wouldn't that be wonderful? I'd be so grateful to you, Catherine." However, due to my mother just being hospitalized and the house not being tidied up, along with the fact that my divorce was not yet finalized, we put that plan on hold for the time being. If I were nearby, I could manage the living expenses, and I could take them to the hospital if something happened. If my husband could take care of his mother that much, I thought it was only right I could think this far. For the next 2 or 3 days, I stayed at my parents' house and spent some long overdue time with my father. He said about the divorce, "Whether you go through with this will greatly affect your future life. If you discuss it, you might change your mind. Whatever the outcome, if you've decided it for your happiness, we will support you." Encouraged by this, I returned to the home where my husband and mother-in-law were waiting and demanded a divorce.
Why? What did I do?
My husband stammered, clearly agitated. I explained it as my last chance. I couldn't accept his attitude of treating me like the villain along with his mother, ignoring how she mistreated me. "If your mother is the most important, then stay with her. I don't need to be your wife," I told him, and to my surprise, he started sobbing. The sight of a grown man crying so pitifully left me dumbfounded, and I waited in silence until he stopped. He might have thought crying would comfort him. As I stood there with a stern face, he gradually stopped the dramatic crying and clung to my feet.
"I hate the thought of divorcing over something like this. Please reconsider, I beg you. From now on, I'll listen to you, Catherine, and I'll make sure my mother stops being harsh to you."
I was angered to hear him dismiss my long-standing concerns as something like this, but honestly, I still had feelings for my husband. Apart from his mother, I had thought my husband was flawless, and if I decided to divorce now, the satisfaction it would give my mother-in-law was unbearable. Just as my father said, I began to wonder whether it was right to make a decision about divorce right there. If my husband kept his promise and stopped his mother's torment, maybe our pleasant everyday life awaited us. Since he had shown his feelings by crying like never before, his sincerity must be genuine. While I stood pondering, he kept saying sorry. Maybe I should believe this once and try to rebuild. If things go wrong again, I can consult my parents at that time. I couldn't let my parents worry anymore, so I decided to accept my husband. I told him that although we wouldn't divorce, I wanted to build a new house for my parents and pay the down payment with my savings. If the loan was approved, I would continue to make the payments, and I wanted the house in my name. Typically, the house might be built in the name of the husband who earns more, but I didn't want to risk his mother claiming, "My son's house is my house," so I decided to remove that seed of doubt now. Far from suspecting the clear intention behind putting the house in my name, my husband leaned in and said, "I want to help make your parents' lives better too. I haven't been able to do anything for Catherine's parents until now." He even suggested building the new house near our current home and visiting my parents often, as he wanted to talk to them. Since I hinted at divorce, my husband started speaking with more respect for our family, which felt a bit off, as if he really disliked the idea of divorcing me. Maybe at that time, I was somewhat exhilarated by his change. However, my mother-in-law continued to look down on me as usual, although she seemed not to enjoy it anymore since my husband no longer joined in her taunts. I don't know if my husband thought it odd that he suddenly changed his behavior toward me, but thanks to that, my mother-in-law calmed down, and my stress significantly decreased. Our area is relatively urban with several hospitals nearby, which was one reason why the new house was located near our current home, as my husband suggested. He also accompanied me to the real estate agency, insisting on specific interior details for the comfort of my parents, who have difficulty moving freely. I hadn't set a budget limit initially, so I accepted his suggestions rather than regretting being stingy later. Thinking about how this would contribute to a comfortable second life for my parents made me happy. As we had many meetings, time flew by quickly, and about a year after we first visited the realtor, the house was completed. At the time of the handover, the cherry blossoms were blooming, adding to the festive atmosphere of a new life. My mother, who had just been discharged from the hospital, eagerly pulled my father and me to a home center to choose curtains and carpets, which was a memorable scene. Even when we went to the completed house, I laughed as I watched her take out the purchases from the bags. As I was about to say, "Around this corner is our new home," I noticed something was off.
Why are you here?
In front of a brand new two-family house that had not yet blended into the surrounding residential area, where my parents and I were supposed to live, stood my mother-in-law and my husband.
You finally arrived. Catherine, you have the keys, right?
Let's go inside quickly. As soon as I parked the car, my husband approached me with a smile. Seeing my parents' anxious faces in the rearview mirror, I got out of the car first, leaving them behind.
Before we go in, explain first. Why is your mother here too? If you're inviting her, it should be after we've settled in.
I didn't intend to invite her at all, but I phrased it as diplomatically as possible. Standing next to my husband, my mother-in-law had suspiciously large luggage, but she wore an intimidating smile that seemed to prevent any questioning.
Come on, don't say invite like it's a bad thing.
She's a resident here too, you know.
What?
The unbelievable words released in my husband's cheerful voice stopped my thoughts. My husband saw my expression and smirked. It was brief, but I didn't miss it.
You had that "why is your mother here" look just now, right? That should be my line. Why are Catherine's parents here? You didn't really think I was serious about making this house for Catherine's parents, did you? What are you talking about?
This was a complete reversal from his previous attitude and statements. This house was for my parents. I consulted and bought it for them. My husband just barged in and started making demands. And he had the audacity to betray me like that. Even in front of my parents.
This is supposed to be our home with my mother. The interior is done to her liking, of course. You didn't say anything, so I just did what I wanted. What's wrong with that? Sorry to your parents, but they'll have to move into a facility, I guess.
My husband said with a half-smile, and I could feel the malice in his approach. A rage like I had never felt before made my body tremble, and my vision began to blur.
Was that your plan from the beginning? Because, Catherine, you kept avoiding my mother, and it wasn't fun at all. It was supposed to be a cohabitation started because my mother wanted to get along with you, but you obviously kept your distance. My mother has been sad all this time. Then, out of the blue, you talk about divorcing me and living with your own parents. I was shocked. So, it might have been sneaky, but I decided to finish the house without telling you. It's completed now, so it's too late to stop living together, right? Plus, it's strange to suddenly stop living with my mother when we've been doing it for so long. It was all started by Catherine's impulsive idea, so please convince your parents?
His patronizing tone, as if lecturing a small child, made me feel as though something inside me had broken. Despite my parents being right behind me and the presence of neighbors, I spoke up clearly.
I understand your character very well now. If you want to live in this house so badly that you deceive your own wife, then live here. But in exchange, I'm divorcing you right here and now. I will never see you again.
I immediately turned away and got back into the car. My husband tried to say something in response, but I was too upset to listen. I drove off suddenly, causing my father to exclaim, "What's going on? What happened?" But my mother, reading my expression, calmed him down, and we drove off in a heavy silence. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise that my parents' old home wasn't fully cleared out yet. Upon returning home, I saw boxes piled up at the entrance. These were supposed to be in the new house by now. After dropping off my parents, I parked the car and entered the old house.
I'm sorry for all the packing you did. I'll sort this out quickly so we can move as soon as possible.
Maybe I should have stood my ground and moved into the new house right then. After all, I own it. However, the actions and words of my husband had shattered what we had built up over the years. I thought I had been cautious enough with my mother-in-law, but I couldn't stand how easily they had taken away something so important to me. That's why, in the end, I chose to flee from that place. If only I had been stronger, my parents wouldn't have had to suffer like this. Even in such times, all I could do was blame myself, which made me furious. Still, I was determined to reclaim that long-awaited house. So I called my husband every day, morning and night, trying to talk it out. But he always said the same thing.
Both Mom and I are worried about you, Catherine. I've never heard of someone divorcing to take care of their parents. It's better to enrich our marital life than to care for aging parents. You became my wife, Catherine, and you're also a child to my mother. It's natural for you to live with your husband's parents. If you apologize to my mother and me and change your attitude, we can let bygones be bygones. Think about your parents later.
I had brought up divorce not because of my parents, but because of the relentless abuse from my mother-in-law and my husband's participation in it. After such treatment, how could I possibly continue living with them? And why should I be the one to apologize? When I pressed these points, my husband said, "If we live together again, you'll see how important we are to each other. As a wife, you should listen to your husband more than your parents." He was not only unsupportive of my feelings but also refused to agree to a divorce. However, I was so eager to sever ties with him and his mother that during one of our phone calls, I hinted that I was considering mediation for divorce. I thought that without this step, we would never move forward, and they would continue to occupy the new house indefinitely. Just as I had intended, the mention of mediation made my husband reluctantly agree to the divorce. He mailed me the signed divorce papers, and all I had to do was sign and submit them, ensuring our divorce was finalized. I had explained to my parents that all that was left was for them to vacate the house, but reality was not so simple. My ex-husband and his mother, knowing that the new house was in my name and that I was repaying the loan, showed no signs of moving out. No matter how many times I urged them to leave, they only made excuses like, "I'm too busy with work, I've started needing to go to the hospital," or "I have to start the moving process all over again." It seemed they had sold their original home and moved into the new one without my permission, making it difficult to forcefully evict them. Since it was easy to imagine the two continuing to take advantage of the situation and stay in the new house, I was boiling with frustration. Yet, as time passed, about a month after the divorce, my attachment to the house began to wane. The divorce was finalized, and both the bank and the real estate agency were informed. If it became impossible to do anything about it, I could live at my parents' home for a while. After all, I didn't particularly want to live in a house tainted by my mother-in-law. But what really concerned me was the loan. I am not wealthy, so continuing to pay for a house I do not live in is challenging. I have no obligation to assist the life of someone who has become a stranger to me. As I was brooding over this, I received a call from my ex-husband. Since it was unusual for him to initiate contact, I took the call with a sense of foreboding.
"Hey! There's no way I can make a lump sum payment. What are you thinking?"
Before I could even greet him, my ex-husband's angry voice pierced through. Taken aback by a tone I had never heard from him before, I remained silent. He continued, obviously irritated.
"I just got a call from the bank. They were saying something about the loan payments. When I said I didn't know anything, they told me, 'You are obligated to pay.' What does that mean? You built the house in your name. You pay the loan. I was embarrassed because of you."
His words were somewhat unclear due to his agitation, but here's the gist of it.
"We are divorced. I do not live in that house. I have informed both the bank and the real estate agency of these facts. The house is being occupied by you and your mother, right? Then one of you should reapply for the loan and make the payments together. The bank is aware that I intend to transfer the title, so rest assured." Wasn't that what the call was about?
Surely. My calm explanation seemed to infuriate my ex-husband even more. He shouted loud enough that I could hear him without putting the phone to my ear, "Who cares about that? Since you moved things forward on your own, you should pay. The title remains in your name until I agree to accept it. If you leave things as they are, it will affect your credit rating. Was he trying to threaten me? His tone was defiant. But I could hear weakness in his voice, a slight tremor that didn't quite match his confident facade.
Oh, so you admit that it's my house, and you're staying there against my will? We are strangers now, so you have no right to live there, right? Besides, I have no regrets about that house anymore. A house that has been lived in by others, especially my ex-husband and his mother, is not a place I want to step foot in. What's your plan? If you continue to stay there without making payments, I intend to arrange for legal action. Or will you move out in a few days?
You can choose. In contrast to my ex-husband's agitated state, I felt surprisingly calm, almost wondering how I had ever been manipulated by such an immature person. On the other hand, my ex-husband fell silent. Knowing his character, he probably feared the word court.
I mean, the loan is just a few $1,000s. Wouldn't it be quicker just to change the title and pay it off? You're supposed to be earning more than me, right?
This seemed to be the final blow, and the call ended abruptly. I had an inkling why my ex-husband was reluctant to pay. Once, when we were still living together, he came home drunk from a company drinking party and spilled the contents of his wallet in the living room. Seeing something unusual, I was drawn to it and picked up what had fallen out. His wallet was always bulging, not because he was organized but because of the sheer number of receipts and unfamiliar credit cards. While I didn't find any evidence of infidelity, the worn-out cards, frequently used, gave me a bad feeling. My mother-in-law often demanded expensive bags and beauty appliances, which my ex-husband generously provided. Perhaps these were all on revolving credit. Considering the envelopes from unknown places that sometimes ended up in our mailbox, there might have been delays in payments. Since he had started the phone call by stating, "I can't make a lump sum payment," it's likely he failed the credit check for the house loan. He probably hung up unilaterally to prevent me from discovering this, but I had already seen through it. A week passed with no further contact from my ex-husband. Just to be safe, I formally hired the lawyer I had consulted, and after confirming that my ex-husband and his mother were still in the house under my name, I had the lawyer send a letter of notice. It stated that they must vacate the house immediately or face legal action as warned. A few days later, it seems they finally moved out. If they were so afraid of court, they should have moved out before causing a fuss. Still, more than anything, I wanted to sever ties quickly, so I refrained from saying anything unnecessary. Shortly after, I visited the house I was supposed to live in. I was accompanied by a real estate agent to check the condition of the house on the spot, and decided to sell it. Telling my parents that I wanted to sell the house was quite hard. Especially since my mother had been really looking forward to living in the new house, she looked momentarily sad when I told her. However, she soon smiled at my father and said, "Catherine has prepared everything for us. We have no complaints, only gratitude. It's a bit disappointing about the house, but as long as we are with Catherine, we'll be happy anywhere." After selling the house, there wasn't much money left after offsetting the mortgage, but I decided to switch gears and enjoy life with my parents. About 6 months later, I suddenly received a call from my lawyer. The call was to inform me that when I had time, I should come by, which didn't seem too urgent, but still made me somewhat uneasy. The lawyer informed me that my ex-husband and his family had turned up at our old home. However, we no longer lived there, and a family unknown to them was residing there, which prompted them to contact the lawyer. Of course, we had not informed my ex-husband and his family of our move, so they must have been quite surprised. If possible, I would have loved to see their faces at that moment, but I had no intention of appearing before them myself. I asked the lawyer to deliver a letter to them instead. First, I mentioned that I had recently changed jobs, so contacting my former employer would be pointless. Before leaving my previous job, I had informed them that I was divorced and that they should ignore any contact from my ex-husband. Despite being blameless, I didn't want to inconvenience anyone with personal issues, so I made sure to emphasize not to contact me at all. Also, I wrote that we had moved to a place with no prior connections or ties. Thanks to a lottery win by my father, we used some of that money to buy a small house and were living a smooth life. I wrote that the area we moved to was slightly more urban and had better transportation than where we had lived before, but I couldn't boast much more as we didn't want to be identified. Knowing that we were living a better life might make them desperately seek us out, and I considered that a form of revenge. The lawyer also briefly updated me on my ex-husband and his family's current situation. Apparently, while looking for me, my ex-husband had remarried a beautiful woman from a wealthy family. However, they divorced within a month. The cause of the divorce was, yet again, related to his mother. They had pressured the new wife with unbearable demands such as, "Don't work, perfect the housework, and if you don't have children within 3 years, it's over." Shocked by the drastic change in my ex-husband's behavior after marriage, the new wife quickly fled back to her parents' home, only to return furiously with them. Thinking they could just find another woman if this one left, the two were literally grabbed by the new wife's father and received a harsh scolding severe enough to ensure they wouldn't dare mistreat another woman. They were immediately made to sign divorce papers and acclaimed for compensation, effectively being punished thoroughly. The lawyer mentioned that my ex-husband had asked about possibly reducing the compensation, and he was contemplating whether to take on that request. As the chances of you encountering your ex-husband and his family are extremely low, the lawyer prefaced, ensuring that he would no longer contact me in the future. As a precaution, he wanted to eliminate any risk of information leakage, given that he was the only link between me and my ex-husband. I sincerely thanked the lawyer and left his office. From now on, I will live a life for myself. Avoiding troublesome men, I would spend peaceful days with my parents. With that thought, I spent several years in tranquility. And then, those who had threatened my married life unexpectedly reappeared in my sight. While cleaning up after lunch, glancing at the daytime show my mother often watched while napping, I stopped in my tracks. The names of my ex-husband and his mother were on the screen. Seeing both names I knew well, I involuntarily paused. According to the news, they were currently on trial. They claimed to be victims, deceived by a woman and her family whom they labeled as a family of fraudsters. The conflict started when the ex-husband's former spouse, tired of the severe mistreatment, spread the details on social media. The posts were detailed enough to identify their whereabouts and professions, leading to defamation and a disrupted life for my ex-husband and his family. In response, my ex-husband and his party did not remain silent. They stirred up the conflict by labeling the former spouse and her parents as alimony-seeking fraudsters. The situation escalated into a brawl when they finally confronted each other, leading to their arrest by the police, and they have been embroiled in a legal battle for years. After the news segment ended, curious for more details, I searched the internet for articles. I quickly found many articles revealing that my former mother-in-law had been injured by her former spouse during the trial and had been hospitalized. Unfortunately, she suffered brain damage due to the injury, making it likely she would reside in a facility after being discharged. While the new wife and her family might be at a disadvantage due to causing the injury, considering the treatment she had endured from my former mother-in-law and ex-husband, it's unlikely they would escape without any reprimand. The former spouse they were disputing with must be the new wife I heard about from my lawyer a few years ago. Regardless of her actions, I feel sympathy for her having been manipulated by them. From now on, I hope they only associate with good people, and I will support them quietly in that